Hello everyone, welcome to our new webinar, Signals and Now What? Lessons from the Coronavirus Crisis. As a quick reminder, your microphones are muted by default. We invite you to type your questions in the question dialog box for that purpose, and we will follow up on them after the meeting. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's great to be back together. And thank you for being with us today for our first webinar of this new Ipsos series. In these new monthly appointments, we aim to help us all better understand what's going on, the complex dynamics of today as we prepare for tomorrow. In each of our episodes, we will explore a specific theme and we will bring to you new perspectives. They will be grounded in insights based on research and as well as real life experiences. For this first session, we will be taking stock of the crisis that we have all been going through over the past few months and trying to understand some of its learnings. You have seen that the title is, "And Now What?" And indeed, after many months, we see that governments, businesses, and people in general are still struggling to make new decisions in a world that is very changed and that we did not expect to be as it is today. So on our agenda for you today, we have first Simon in London, who will talk about adaptations and anxieties based on our latest analysis of public opinion around the world. Then Radhecka from Singapore will tackle the role of culture in a global crisis and how a deep understanding of identity and values is going to be very important to make the right decisions. Colin in Cincinnati will explain how premium brands can still grow and thrive during a recession with his piece on affordable indulgences. And finally, Ian, back in London, will discuss packaging post-COVID and the art of balancing elements that may not be always compatible, such as sustainability, safety, and price. And with this, I'm passing the floor to Simon.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And to pick up on the "And Now What" theme, what I've tried to do for this session is to prepare some material that helps us all stay close to what's happening. I've done that under 3 banners, trying to be close to the latest consumer attitudes and behaviours with some findings as September begins, to look ahead to what unfortunately is likely to be a rather difficult economic period, but also to help us take stock with some of the latest resources and material that's at all of our disposal. So to start, really, thinking about the latest in terms of how people around the world are feeling. Those of you who've been with us in recent months will know that we've been tracking public opinion every week, every fortnight since February through a study called Essentials. And the latest wave, we've been trying to really get close to perhaps that mood in terms of how people feel 6 or 9 months into this crisis. And our first question really was, well, how does it feel? Are we in control, out of control in the country in which you live? And the answer is that it rather depends on which country you live in. I feel like things in my country are out of control right now. I'm afraid on the leaderboard, we have the US and Spain, where a really strong sense that things are, let's say, not stable, not as they should be. In contrast, Canada, Germany, China, actually, despite all of the pressures and difficulties that each of those countries, of course, have been through, a sense perhaps of a little bit more stability. So not for the first time, we're finding big differences by countries. We're going to come back to that later in today's session, even though we're all experiencing this global pandemic, and even though expectations are actually rather similar around the world, and regrettably they are more at the end of the spectrum where we think there's going to be another wave of infections coming. So what does this tell us about our expectations, and what are we learning in terms of our states of mind at the moment? Again, what we tried to do in the recent months was to ask people to assess where they are on the phases of the crisis. And during lockdown, we asked them to do their self-assessment of their current state of mind. And we often found a progression, if you like, during the lockdown periods from the left-hand side of the chart to the right-hand side of the chart as we started to look ahead to things perhaps opening up and things restarting. Now, I think even at that time, we felt this is unlikely to be a linear process, and that's exactly what we are finding. The current picture from the global perspective is that things are stuck or stable around the middle of the chart. The median person, if you like, is adapting to the restrictions, settling into some new routines. But many people are actually on the left-hand side of the chart, still perhaps getting ready for new restrictions or only in the process of starting those new routines. We're finding rather fewer people in the famous new normal category. And it does feel, after perhaps the last few weeks and reflecting on those, this is a phrase which is being used rather less than it was. So we're in this, let's say, uncertain period. We know that the next stage is likely to be rather difficult from an economic perspective. And I wanted just to draw on the experiences of the people we've been following through the crisis during our digital ethnography project. We touched on this in our July webinar for those of you who were with us then. And at that time, we were trying to look at how people felt about the future, about expenditure, about, for example, whether I should or shouldn't spend what money I have now, and those difficult choices that people face on an individual level. And what our team has been doing in recent weeks is bringing together a documentary, pulling into one place those perspectives from people around the world, as, in the words of our team, rather stark language, as we stumbled into a pandemic and tumbled into a recession. We've got the link to the video trailer now. During September, we'd love to share the full documentary with you. It includes those perspectives from people's own words and their own lives, but also from colleagues in Ipsos and indeed from outside Ipsos as we start to try to understand what this pandemic-shaped recession might look like. And my third set of, I guess, observations and resources draws on some experiences we've been having from our work around the world. We've got a lot of data now, starting in China, Europe, then the US, on different countries. We haven't always had a huge amount of data on Africa, and I'm pleased to be able to share this research with you, which gives us perspectives from 18 African Union member states. Perspectives on the perceived risk of catching coronavirus, very high, for example, in South Africa. Perspectives on compliance, in this example, on taking up face masks, fairly consistent across countries, but not everywhere, as the findings from Sudan and Tunisia show us. And also perspectives on that tension that we're seeing around the world on balancing the risks of loosening restrictions and the need to get the economy moving. In Africa, the overall mood is more on getting the economy moving, but as you can see, still big differences from country to country, and a reminder of the need for us to sometimes be a bit careful about global or regional comparisons. When we're looking at individual countries, the largest country in the world being Russia, we have a new piece of work from our team looking at trends in Russia, looking at what may happen next. They've pulled together for us both some macro analysis on the country and the economy, the latest in terms of consumer sentiment and how people are feeling, but also for those of us whose job it is to perhaps have an understanding on what may be happening in this market, how brands have been responding to the crisis in Russia, international brands, but also local brands. And the example from the S7 Airlines which is a promotional activity around, if you like, gaining air miles while we're flying at home, is an interesting example of consumer engagement that our Russia team have drawn out as one of their learnings for how brands are responding to these completely, if you like, unexpected circumstances. And with all of this discussion, perhaps in these resources I've been sharing now around different countries, it brings us on to this question about how we can better understand different cultures and get close to what's happening on the ground. We have a new white paper around cultural response, around helping us better think through international studies and how we can better analyze and design international studies. That's available to download now. We also have a new white paper on how an understanding of culture can get us closer to understanding this particular crisis that we're all living through. That white paper has been developed by my colleague Radhecka Roy and her team. It's available to download now, but more importantly, perhaps, Radhecka is available to talk to us now live from Singapore. And Radhecka, it's great to have you with us. How are you today?
Good. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's good to be with you. One of the things that you've pulled out in your paper, which is really trying to, I think, take a panorama perhaps of the different things we need to think about, is the use of language. And you draw, we had it in the slide earlier, on some of the language that governments have been using in their communication. President Macron in France talked rather vividly about us being at war with an invisible enemy, and that's not the kind of language that's been used in a number of other countries, and you draw on that, for example, in relation to India in your paper. And I wondered if you could share your experiences just looking at what different governments have been doing in their communications.
Yeah, I think we're also seeing it in all these numbers you're showing about wearing masks, right? Some people want to, some people don't. I think COVID and the response to COVID in some sense is a curtailment of your freedom. You are, undertaking some amount of sacrifice, constraint, regulation, and that, it's human nature that different cultures react differently to that kind of curtailment. And I think in Western cultures where it's an inalienable right, you find that the metaphor of war or an external enemy is a very good rallying point to get people to then comply and work together. In say more Confucian culture, say for example China, freedom is it's a very relative concept, where it depends on free from what. So they're willing to trade off personal freedom if it means it's giving them freedom from disease, from problems. So it's a very pragmatic approach. And then you have India, where freedom, I think, is carried to its most extreme, and just rules and laws are not going to get you compliance, because it's a heritage of revolting against external rulers. So you have to get an inner calling for a greater cause to sort of give up your freedom, and which is why you see the different messaging that comes across. It's the same freedom and it's the same curtailment, but the way you co-opt is different.
Yeah, no, that's really profound, just seeing those different examples. One thing, and I was perhaps talking to myself here, is I may be a little bit loose perhaps when I talk about culture, and I'm just interested in your take on perhaps helping me be a bit more disciplined here in terms of the key themes and things I should be thinking about if I'm genuinely really trying to perhaps look at things through what one might call a more cultural lens.
Yeah, so culture can feel a bit abstract, but at Ipsos, we sort of define it as shared values that shape individual behavior. So there is something collective, but there's also something that you see at an individual level. And I think there are layers to this in terms of how you access culture, because people are not going to tell you, this is my culture, or this is not my culture. You access it through different layers. And the most visible layer, which is also the thing that changes most, is the behavior. the habits, the routines. And I saw that you're talking about new routines and new normal. And sometimes just looking at these changes may make us believe that the culture is really changing. But these are just adaptations to immediate things that are changing in your surrounding. At a deeper level are attitudes, which do change less frequently and less, to a lesser extent. And but different events, different sort of debates and discussions can influence the attitudes. Deeper below those are the values, and values are something which are deep, which are handed down from generations. There's a collective social sort of consciousness that shapes it. It doesn't change very easily. And if you know that layering and how to anchor all the changes and the disruption you see around you to these deep-seated values, then it makes culture very accessible. Otherwise, if you talk to Japanese, for example, you'll say, oh my God, the culture is completely changing. But it's just the manifestations that are changing. The fundamental culture of implicit communication, a lot of symbolic meaning in a lot of things, ritualism, that has not changed. The actual rituals may have changed.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think one of the patterns we've been observing in this webinar series is very much, week by week, month by month, things are changing so much, and what we declare is changed forever may not, as we then come back to it a week or a month or 2 months later. You've been very vocal about the importance of us thinking through what this means and what a deeper cultural understanding can give us in our work, but particularly in times of crisis. And I was just interested about what you're seeing in terms of, let's say, living through this crisis or experiencing this crisis. Why should we be particularly alert now, and what are we learning?
A crisis means some amount of disruption, right? Things that you knew are no longer there, or they've been completely subverted. And this causes anxiety. I think we can all agree that this is a time of universal anxiety for almost every culture that's around. And a lot of our, social understanding or behavioral science tells us that in times of anxiety, people look for familiarity. People look for something to anchor them in this sea of change that is happening around them. And that is where we tend to hark back to a culture. So of course, consumers are getting much more deliberative in the way they make their choices, but the priorities that are shaping their choices are very much about their culture. So if you are an affiliative culture, your priorities will be still around those affiliative values. And if you're an affirmative culture, you're still looking for new ways to express your individuality. And I think this is a good time. This kind of crisis sort of dials up the role of culture. So definitely very important to keep our hand on that pulse.
Well, I mean, I think, and these all of these themes you share with us in your paper, which I guess takes us through the landscape and the things that we need to think through. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand back to Jennifer in the studio in northern Italy, but thank you so much, Radhecka, for being with us today.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Radhecka. Very, very interesting perspective. I was wondering, from this cultural lens, what advice would you give to brands, since lots of the people on the call are probably managing brands?
So I think brands are, there's so much attention now to everything that a brand does, how they behave, how genuine they are, how authentic they are, how much are they contributing back, and how much are they supporting the consumers. So, and this is a time of uncertainty for brands as well as consumers. So I think having that cultural backbone and that framework to profile and see how you need to nuance, how you need to be relevant, and how you can support in an authentic way for brands, it's very, very important. So I would strongly urge that this is possibly the best time to think about cultural profiling of different markets, and then also gives you a lot of efficiencies.
Yeah. And I guess to have a really relevant speech and not just to be drowned in a sea of sameness, as we've seen sometimes. Great. Thanks a lot, Radhecka. Yeah. It was great. It was great to see you and to hear you. And talking about brands, we're now going to focus on premium brands with Colin's piece. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. So during a recession, we know that consumers will tighten up their purse strings, and you may have the question, and can premium brands survive? We believe they can, and we're going to explain why. We believe they can survive because we all have a basic need of wanting a little happiness in our life. We want a little bit of joy, a little bit of pleasure in our life. And this is when, in fact, with COVID-19, this need becomes even stronger, that you want a little bit of happiness every day in your life. So because you want a little bit of happiness, we often get those through little things. So little things would be, maybe it's for you, it might be that ice cream that you have after dinner for dessert. For others of you, it may be that morning coffee or tea that you have. And we call these little things affordable indulgences. They're affordable because it doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's an indulgence because it does give a little bit of happiness. And we firmly believe that affordable indulgences can not only survive but thrive during a recession. Yeah, people certainly will want to save money, but as you will see, I'll show you some examples where people can be pretty creative when it comes to saving money, but also getting a little bit of happiness. So instead of buying, for example, 4 cups of Starbucks coffee a week, during a recession, a person might say, well, I'm just going to buy myself a Starbucks creamer and a cheaper coffee brand, and that's going to save me money, but I'll still get my little bit of happiness. Now, instead of eating a steak at a restaurant for $50 during a recession, someone might say, well, let me go to the grocery store, buy myself a nice steak and eat it at home for a lot less. This actually came from a study that was done and that looked at sales data from the last recession. And they found that people switched from eating out to basically buying certified Angus beef. So consumption of certified Angus beef went up, and that's a premium brand. Just one more example here, which is that instead of buying, for example, a $2,000 purse, a person during a recession might say, well, let me just buy something for $1,000. This, again, is not a hypothetical example. This actually came from YSL, Yves Saint Laurent, where during the last recession, they did introduce a lower price line of collection of purses, and they got increased sales volume and also expanded their customer base. So this example is also a perfect one in the sense that if you have a multiple brand portfolio and don't focus on your most expensive brand, focus on your second most expensive brand because it's probably going to do better during a recession. So yeah, people want to save money during a recession, but we still have this basic need of wanting a little happiness in our life. By now, you may have the question is my brand or product considered an affordable indulgence? And we're going to spend the next few slides showing you how you would answer that question. So for us, we had fielded a large survey in 16 countries during June of this year. And in that survey, one of the questions we asked was, we asked consumers to kind of group product categories into 4 different groups. We asked them to tell us which product categories would fall in, products that are considered necessary for survival, essentials. What products they would consider as, indulgences, whose immediate purchase is considered justifiable. So this is what we're calling the affordable indulgence. Another category was, what products can be put off until a later time, postponables, and what products they would consider unnecessary, expendables. So we took the results from these 16 countries, and we're showing you a sample of the results here, and we'll focus on the second column here for treats or affordable indulgence. If you look through the list, you'll see that most of them are food items. A few of them are very intuitive, like candy, chocolate, ice cream, and then there's some like nutritional bars or snacks that are a little bit more surprising, but it also tells you that for some people, affordable indulgence may be about health, something about nutritious. If you don't see your product category here, don't worry. I mean, in this survey, we could test only a limited number of product categories, and we're just showing you a few here. We'll show you a few non-food examples as well in the next few slides. So the results can vary by market segment. So we'll show you 2 results here for bread and gaming consoles. If I direct your attention to the chart on the left, if you look at LATAM, so if you look at LATAM, we find that a large percentage of consumers, they actually consider bread as an affordable indulgence or a treat. It's not too surprising considering the amount of financial pressure in LATAM that they would consider something as basic as bread a treat. Now, in gaming console in APAC, in Asia, there's a large chunk of consumers that actually consider gaming console a treat or an affordable indulgence. And again, this makes sense. You think about it in Asia, if you're being quarantined and you're not allowed to go out of your house, well, what's going to make you happy? A gaming console, at least for 25% of Asians. So we want to also provide you some proof that consumers are still willing to pay more for a treat. And what we did was we look at beer and makeup, and we compared people who had paid more recently for this products or not. And looking at beer, people who did pay more for beer recently, they were more likely to group beer as a treat or affordable indulgence compared to people who did not pay more. And you see the same pattern when it comes to makeup. The people who paid more for makeup recently paid a higher price than usual than people who did not pay more, and that is significant difference for treats or affordable indulgence. So the question is, we think there probably is an opportunity for some premium brand. And to kind of sum up the points that I went over quickly, premium brand views affordable indulgence, we believe will do better during a recession. You, of course, need to discover whether your brand first spot views an affordable indulgence, by whom, not everyone might, and in which markets. Okay? And finally, is positioning your brand as an affordable indulgence and introducing a new brand that's positioned as one. And that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Colin. So you've been talking about lots of different types of affordable indulgences, and I was wondering, what has been your experience over the past few months? Have you had any affordable treat in your life?
I do, and strangely, it has nothing to do with food. So for me personally, it's been more about anything that I could purchase for like exercise equipment. That to me has been my kind of affordable indulgence, just little things like maybe like a dumbbell or something like that. But that's what makes me a little bit happy.
Great.
And healthy.
Yeah, good. I think many of us have had that kind of approach when we couldn't go out to do sports and stuff. So great. Thank you so much, Colin. And sure. I am now passing on the floor to Ian, who's also going to talk about affordability somewhat, but through the lens of packaging with some of the other elements that are now important. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. So to talk about clean, green and affordable, I'd like to begin with a short rewind. Consider some of the packaging innovation that we've seen in the last couple of years. Lots of reasons to be positive here, where we've seen innovation which is driving around sustainability to reach new retail channels through e-commerce, for example. So we're seeing lots of great examples of packaging which is reducing material or taking out material, packaging which is reducing weight, making it easy to transport, taking out plastic in the sense of e-commerce here, and ultimately reducing carbon emissions. And also examples of refilling with pride, putting the refill front and center of the proposition and pushing that as a very positive initiative for the brand because of the advantages that it brings in terms of sustainability. So that type of innovation sits very well with our global consumer. So across 28 countries in 2019, 80% agreed with the statement that manufacturers should be obliged to help with the recycling and reuse of packaging that they produce. So there's a very strong sentiment that manufacturers have a responsibility, and that has been built over time. But the question that we sort of asked ourselves with that context is, coming into 2020 and all of the experiences that we've had globally, how might packaging be impacted going forward? And we considered three aspects. First of all, from a hygiene perspective, with the focus on hygiene, of course, and transmission, How are people behaving with respect to the products that they buy? Is there a change in need, which really should impact how manufacturers develop packaging? That's one of the questions we want to address. And we see an extreme example on the page here of behavior related to hygiene. In terms of green, is the impact of COVID going to impact the perceptions, the attitudes which have been built over time with respect to sustainability? You know, we're being exposed to the fact that you can't reuse a cup, or you know that there's a greater increase in single use. Is this going to impact our attitudes towards sustainability? And again, how does that play out in terms of development? And finally, affordability, of course, as we face a global recession, how should price be considered in the equation? So we'll treat briefly each of those points in turn and focus on clean first. But what we all experience, of course, is that behavior has, of course, changed. In this measure that we see in May, 16 countries, 37% of us claim to have disinfected or washed the products that we bought in the previous few weeks. And that's a manifestation of control, of course, you know, as are some of the other elements here. So, you know, I've also avoided stores that are not practicing social distancing. I've avoided stores that don't require face masks, for example. We're kind of applying a degree of control in our own circumstances to kind of cope with, you know, the issues that we face. So that's you know, 37%, that's 1 in 3 of us, and that's obviously significant. I think what's interesting though, as we kind of feel our way forward, is to consider that type of behaviour by country. Now, with respect to Radhecka's presentation earlier, of course, there are cultural differences, and we'll never expect one country to be similar to another. But I would just point out what we see on the right-hand chart there, which is Germany at 9%. So a country which has done you know, really well in terms of management of COVID, in terms of incidence rates. Back in May, we had only 9% of the population disinfecting or washing the products that they bought. So as an optimistic, or as an optimist, I'll take that view and hopefully project that forward, that, you know, there is reason to be optimistic that once this situation is normalized, we can expect behavior to normalize as well. Now, of course, there's no guarantee of that, but if we aspire to a German situation, then I think we have reasons to be positive. The second aspect is green, as we describe here, sustainability. And you know, there are many sort of bits of data on this, but I want to draw your attention to climate in particular. So we asked the question, how do you limit your own contribution to climate change? And the number one top of mind feature that you can see here is I'm going to avoid products which have lots of packaging. Now, of course, that's an easier thing to do than, for example, changing your diet or changing your mode of transportation. It's easier because often you're in a situation of choice as well. So, you know, I'll avoid that and do something else. But the interesting thing here is that people do link it to, you know, the existential issue of climate change. So as well as packaging, obviously link into consumer attitudes on waste, and plastic is the bad guy usually. You know, we kind of feel uncomfortable with that. What we're seeing also is a linkage to climate change. You know, it's something which I can do, it's something which I can contribute to. And the reason I raise that is really with respect to resiliency of attitudes. Now, attitudes have been built over time. You know, we want to do right by the environment. We don't necessarily do right, but we feel we want to do right. So in respect to packaging development, we really have to be confident, I think, that attitude is resilient. And indeed, when we measure that in April, in this case, across 14 countries, mid-April, you know, 79% agree that we want to believe that we'll act responsibly, we'll seek out products that are healthier and better for the environment. So again, I would say a reason to be positive in terms of the path that our clients and manufacturers have been on in terms of sustainability. Now, of course, price matters. We are often irrational, but we are also rational agents in the economy. And when we ask the question, a very simple question and very much attitudinal, of course, but, you know, all things equal in terms of quality and features, what are the most important to you in your final purchase decision? And what we see is price come into the fore, being the highest mention. And that's probably nothing new. We don't have a comparison before COVID, but, you know, we've certainly got other evidence that, you know, our decisions are often price driven. But really what I want to take out of this chart is that we're not seeing the world turn on its head. So hygiene is important, it's a secondary issue, but it's not rising up to be the, the #1 concern that people have. We're still influenced and concerned by, management of our own budgets, and of course that even more sensitive, perhaps in a period of economic risk and lowered confidence. That's a very attitudinal view up to now. I just want to give a couple of more experimental pieces of data that we have used to kind of reach a conclusion. And this was a claims test done in the UK in May. And the objective here was to assess some rather new to the world COVID claims. And we had them in relation to product and also in relation to packaging. A long list, 32, so I'm just going to do this very, very briefly. But the point that we're seeing here is that even though we've introduced a quite strong sort of, hygiene types of claim, COVID claims, so packaging with smart labeling tells me if the product is contaminated, packages with antiviral materials, when we compare those to other claims, and we do that in a very simple way through choice and through speed of response to sense conviction, what we're finding is, again, that the world isn't going upside down, if I can describe it that way. These very specific and and very strong claims, they're not beating out the more established ideas of food and beverage, in this case being wholesome and natural, products being made from biodegradable packaging or additives or products which are good for you because they help you sleep better. So again, I think there's reasons to be optimistic that the kind of development story that our brands have been on is still very much consistent with attitudes and behaviours today. Now, price, I did mention briefly, but we as well will experiment with price, and in the way that you see on our screen here. We developed a brand, an Ipsos brand called Sustain, and we measured or we tested that in a realistic shopping opportunity that you can see here. People had the choice to buy a dishwash, and either they had the choice to buy Sustain with an ocean plastic claim, or Sustain with no claim at all. And what we saw from that, as you might expect, is that the ocean plastic had a higher overall appeal. It did better on attributes. It was more appreciated. As well, it drove higher levels, significantly higher levels of behavioural trial. So it was a good thing. But what we saw when we increased price, so all things parity, the claim was appealing and it drove higher trial. But as soon as we introduced a price increase, that significant difference was lost in terms of trial. So sustainability drives interest, but watch out on price. And there's nothing particularly new in that finding, but when we see it in a behavioural, experimental context like that, I think it becomes rather compelling. And that research was done in the US. So as a brief summary of our story here, the conclusions we'd make is, disruption due to hygiene is real. We've all experienced it. But it's more related to management of our own behaviour. We're not seeing consumers in the evidence from the UK, for example, really demanding new types of hygiene benefit necessarily. It's more about controlling your own situation. And hopefully, with a view from Germany, we would hope that would normalise over time. Sustainable development remains resolutely relevant, even in COVID-19. That's a strong statement, but all of the evidence points towards that. But more than ever, sustainability shouldn't come with a premium or a compromise. We're entering potentially a global recession, and we have to be mindful that we need to do good by our consumers, but we also have to accept that, as has been shown over time, they're not really willing to pay a premium for that. So that's my presentation. Jennifer.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. So sustainability just has to be part of how we live and how we work as we look to the future, I guess.
Absolutely, it's not going away. I think we can handle a hygiene issue and keep sustainability top of mind as well.
Yeah, so lots of what you talked about, Ian, was around behaviors that are changing, that are being impacted or not being impacted, and also a lot about personal responsibility, about individuals taking action, individuals doing things because they think it's better for our world, basically, and around packaging. There's a lot of behaviors around this. I was wondering if you'd like to share any of anything that you may have personally been doing differently in this sort of, with this sort of mindset?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm a typical consumer. There's no halo around my head with respect to that. But I'd say we do make efforts at home to reduce meat consumption because that is, has been found to be an effective, a very effective way to contribute. The challenge, of course, well, not of course, but I've got two very large teenage boys at home, so that's that's an ongoing debate, let's say. But we've got a pretty firm routine, and I think if you're kind of committed, then identifying areas that you can optimize is open to all of us, even in challenging circumstances.
Great, thank you very much, Ian, for sharing that perspective with us, and thank you to all of our speakers for their great job today. I would like to thank also, of course, everyone who has been with us listening to our webinar. And I would like to give you an appointment for our next edition, which will be on October the 8th. And we have finished even a couple of minutes short of our 45 allotted minutes. So very happy to give everyone back a minute or so of their lives. Thank you and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.